32-year-old Tim Bowers chose to take himself off life support after falling some 16 feet from a tree from the stand he was on when he was hunting. Bowers was paralyzed from the neck down, and the Associated Press reports his family brought him out of sedation in order to ask what he wanted to do. Let me read this for you. "We just asked him, 'Do you want this?' And he shook his head emphatically no," said his sister Jenny Schultz. Doctors asked Bowers the same questions and got the same responses. They then removed his breathing tube. Bowers had just gotten married. His now widow is pregnant. Joining me now, Arthur Kaplan, the head of the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU Langone Medical Center. Arthur, Tim Bowers, we know, died hours later. It is heartbreaking to think about this, but just from your expertise, how rare is a situation like this? How can a person who has just learned he will be paralyzed for the rest of his life make this kind of decision?
Well, Brooke, it's a terrible, tragic case, but there are some lessons here. So the first is everybody has a right as a competent adult to say no to medical treatment, whether it's a Jehovah's Witness who says no to blood transfusion or this gentleman who said no to artificial ventilation. That's clear. The problem is when you have a terrible accident like this, while they're rare, people often say, having been terribly burned or injured, or they know they're paralyzed, that they don't want to live. Some adjust. Some come around after a few days or a week or a couple weeks and say, I've changed my mind. I can deal with this. This gentleman made a decision under, let's say, relatively quick circumstances. I know there are those who are going to be saying, did they give him enough time to think about whether he could live as a paralyzed person?
Isn't that a valid question?
It's a very valid question. I'll tell you what makes me feel more comfortable about the case. You read that AP story excerpt with his family there. There was an interesting thing that followed that, which is his family had had a conversation with him about a month earlier saying, well, what if you got severely injured? What would you want? And he was adamant, no life in a wheelchair. I don't want to be paralyzed. That makes me far more comfortable with this than you might be if you just said, hey, wake up. Last thing you know, you're in a tree. Now you're here. And what do you think? That's a tougher call, which is a reminder. You got to have that conversation. I know it's hard. Thanksgiving's coming. Use this case. Talk to your friends. Talk to your family. Say, this is what I would want. I'd want everything, or you know, I'm not a person who'd want to be wheelchair bound. Tough to do, but
it's a tough conversation.
It really is important to do.
It's a great point. What happens though, Arthur, you know, in the hours after we have this 32-year-old man, they bring him to consciousness, out of sedation, to be able to say, you know, no, I don't want to live. What happens in those hours until the point of death? What's discussed? Are there papers that are signed?
You know, Brooke, it probably doesn't require signatures. His oral statement twice, once to the family, once to the doctors, probably would have done it. The family will gather. They're going to make sure he doesn't suffer at all. You know, if you stop breathing, that can be difficult and burdensome. So they're going to make sure they give him enough oxygen to kind of go peacefully. I think the family assembled. They talked with him. They sang some of their favorite songs together. He had what I think a lot of people would consider a reasonably good death. Unfortunately, just an awful, awful circumstance. Again, a reminder, you don't have to be an old person to sometimes face life and death decisions.